Welcome to this week's episode on the podcast. This is actually a pretty special one. This week, I'm talking to Dr. Luke Sneiwski, the first male guest on the podcast. I was a little bit nervous going into this episode, but this was so aligned to so much of what I speak to, so much what the podcast is about. And Luke is a New Zealand well-being coach and a somatic therapist. He is a certified practitioner, mentor, and facilitator of the compassionate inquiry, which is a therapeutic approach developed by renowned Gabor Mate. I might be mispronouncing that, which is aimed at helping people unearth the root cause of their suffering and self-destructive cycles. The core of what Luke does is reconnecting clients with their bodies so that they can learn how to listen to and care for them. Luke urges, or sorry, Luke argues that authentic change begins with silence, stillness, and the courage to look inward. We may not like what we find there, but getting into our bodies is where the real work of change is done. Through this awareness, we are able to liberate ourselves from our old patterns and core beliefs. And of course, I will have everything linked down in the show notes, all of the ways that you can connect with Luke and work with Luke and just reach out, follow him. I think what he does is so amazing. And, I've said it so many times. Last year really was the year of the body for me. And the more that I tap into myself spiritually, the more that I deepen my spiritual practices. I mean, our bodies are beautiful and amazing and incredible. And yet they hold so much trauma and pain and emotions, right? And it's like when we can't cycle through these, when we can't function, right? We have to get into the body, right? The way to heal is to get into the body. We store emotions from childhood or whatever the case may be, wherever you're holding onto them from, maybe a past relationship, just things that we're not facing, and it builds up and it builds up. And it's these things that we need to face, as I'm really, really diving deep into subconscious reprogramming. It's like the brain, first of all, is fascinating, right? And the mind is fascinating. It's like to change our mindset is powerful and we need to. And also, it makes it easier when our system is cleaner, right? When we can actually understand what our body is telling us. And, meditation and stillness is one key piece of this, being still and silent within ourselves and being able to tune into our body, because so often our gauge for like how we're supposed to feel, like our baseline is it's just off, right? So many people feel like headaches are normal, gas is normal, bloating is normal, indigestion is normal, right? And these things don't have to be our normal. So really, when we can actually tune into our body and begin to understand how it feels and what feels good, then it allows us to gauge that what is a yes and what is a no, right? And then further, when we can come into that stillness and that space of meditation and silence and really being with yourself, which is something that a lot of people avoid because we have a lot of unprocessed trauma that we don't want to face, we don't want to sit with. And it can be so challenging because our mind, when we begin to let in those emotions, like our mind literally doesn't think we can survive it. Some stuff that we have not processed feels so big and so powerful. Like I, for so much of my life, avoided my emotions. I always like prided myself and, I never cried, and I was not like, I was sensitive, but that's not how I portrayed myself, right? If I could be the girl that was just chill and cool and calm, which I have those qualities, but that's not also who I am. Like I'm highly emotional, I'm highly sensitive, I'm highly empathetic. And when I finally allowed myself to actually, the key was when I knew I was safe to feel. So this is a huge piece of it. You have to know that you're safe to feel, to really allow those emotions in. And once I knew I was safe to feel, I literally there was some meme or something on Instagram that I saw, and it was, I don't even know what movie it was, but it was Will Ferrell, and he was like in a phone booth, and he was like crying, and he was like, I'm in a booth of glass cage of my emotions. And I literally thought it was so funny, but also like so true, because like when I when I like first let myself feel, literally, I'm pretty sure I cried for 2 years, like every day for 2 years. And like people around me, especially people who are non-emotional and human design, and be like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" Like thinking I was depressed. I'm like, "No, I actually feel really good." Like it feels good to release. And just because I'm experiencing this right now doesn't mean that like my whole life is this sad, depressing. Like I felt more of those things when I was pretending to be happy and pretending to be emotionless. I felt more of that on the inside. So being able to actually release it and step into that and have a way to process my emotions felt more freeing than anything else. So, yeah, so this episode was really cool. Again, the very first man on the podcast, not because I was avoiding men for any reason. I've had to do my own work around my shadows with men. And so this just again felt so aligned with somatic work, and everything that Luke does felt really aligned for the podcast. And I've already interviewed a second man to come on. I just wanted to, my goal with this is always to have as many voices and as many views as possible, because I think it is so important that we listen to each other. And also, if you're here listening to the podcast and you're looking for a way to heal, a tool to heal, as a 6'3" myself, like I trial and error everything. So even though, not everything is for everyone, but I hope to have something for everyone, right? Like some guest that can resonate with you specifically, right? We're all unique, we're all bio individual. Like I can't, there's no one size fits all for anything, for food, for healing, for fitness. Like there's no one size fits all, right? We all have to figure out what works for us. And so yeah, it's been a beautiful journey. Unfolding with the podcast and just life in general. And yeah, it just was perfect timing, and this was such a great conversation, so I can't wait for you to listen to it. I'm recording this today on Valentine's Day, and I took my son wanted to take me out for a date, so my daughter and I went out. We all went out for dinner. So I am so stuffed right now. But it was delicious. It was good, and you talk about like getting into your body. Like my thing since I quit alcohol, it's been almost 5 months since I've had a drink. And ever since I gave up alcohol, my sugar intake has been going up. And so really trying to fine tune and tap into that, and pull that back, because I do notice like right now, because I had dessert and I just feel like bleh, like it's just I feel gross. And it makes me not want to do anything, right? It makes me not want to meditate and do like my normal practices, which I'm still going to do. But I also I've noticed when I go through like a really deeply, when I'm like, I guess maybe when my consciousness or my level of spirituality or whatever is expanding, I go through this like deep expansion phase, and then I almost like have to come back to this humanness for a while, like ground myself in it, because the last like week I've been tired. I've just been like, I had such a profound experience last weekend. It was the weekend of the Leo new moon. um I just had an incredible meditation where I literally felt like I was high. Like that was the first time I've gotten that deep in a meditation. And I'm not trying to chase that experience, because I know it's not something I can live out every single day or that I'm going to tap into every single day. But I feel tired. And so my meditations have been shorter. But obviously always still doing the work in some way and putting myself first. And meditation is a priority for me. So I've also I everything's like cycles, and everything is experimentation. And I think what you need in the moment. I've never really been one to meditate to music so much, if it wasn't a guided meditation. But I've been really tapping into music and allowing music to move me through meditation, and it's actually been really beautiful. So I've been kind of tapping into that a little bit. And then of course like that though, my logical mind is like, okay, I know this song is 7 minutes, I know that song is 30 minutes, so if I put them together, that's 37 minutes, or I could just do the 7 minute song. So it kind of gets a little bit mental in there, as opposed to just like sitting in silence. But yeah, it's all experimentation. And no matter what you end up doing, you're doing it for yourself, and that's the most important thing. So yeah, again, today I am recording this on Valentine's Day on Tuesday, and we have Venus conjunct Neptune and Pisces today, which I think is such a beautiful energy for Valentine's Day. Venus is beauty, love, morals, values, and then Neptune is sort of, it's spiritual, it's mystical, but it can be delusional, right? So it can be like off in the clouds, it can be floating off in space, and very difficult to be grounded in this plane. And so combine the two of these, it's like kind of taking off all these all this energy of Venus, right? That can kind of just make it a little bit delusional, which, if you're in a healthy partnership and you're going out, I think that's a beautiful energy to run off. But I also think the material aspect of Venus is grounding for Neptune. So it's just this really cool combination, in my personal opinion, the energy that I'm sensing from it. And then, but yeah, it's a cool energy to have. And I think it's direct tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So you'll still be feeling it when this podcast episode comes out. Um, and yeah, you can hop on the Mastery Mondays newsletter that goes out every single Monday with just a transit update for human design and astrology. I update the podcast, and then anything else that's really being called. There's always like a human design lesson. We are currently going through a profile series. We just finished up the authority series. Center series. And now we're going into the profile series. You can follow me on Instagram at rochelle.christian, TikTok. I'm simultaneously doing the profile series on TikTok as I'm doing it on the newsletter. I also did the authority series on TikTok. So much human design information over there. Attachment theory, it's all over there. That's also rochelle.christian. YouTube at Emotional Mastery Podcast. And website is rochellechristian.com. I am in the works for a membership space. And this to me feels really exciting, as I just looked at the time and it was 11:11. This to me feels really exciting. So the vision I have for this is going to be every month we dive into an aspect of your design. So maybe we start with the sun energy, maybe we start with authorities, but we're going to go through some piece and really dissect your design layer by layer and give you enough time to contemplate it, create auto suggestions around it. So auto suggestions have been hugely impactful. Like, I have been working on anxiety. And so I've created an auto suggestion for myself that I say first thing in the morning when I'm literally still in bed, because we want to be in that theta brainwave. So I say it first thing in the morning when I want to be in bed, or when I'm waking up. I do it after meditation, and then I do it as I'm falling asleep. And also, I'll do it like randomly throughout the day when I feel like little spikes of anxiety. I'll kind of just like so like my auto suggestion phase right now is I am confident, I am calm, I'm curious in all situations, because I allow myself to be led by infinite intelligence. So this is like my phrase, right? And so I say it in the morning, I say it at night. I say it at all these key points where I'm in that theta brainwave state, and it is going to rewrite my subconscious beliefs. And the key too is like, if that, we really have to pinpoint the core wound, right? And so going through layers of your design, maybe we're going through centers, maybe we're going through the sun sign, finding like the shadows, the core wounds, pulling those out of those, creating an auto suggestion, and then having a monthly meeting where we can all talk about it. We can dive in. I'll be sharing resources. Like, it's just going to be such a beautiful space. And so that is going to be coming in March. So keep an eye out for that. I will link it up in one of these episodes that are coming out. Just have so much stuff that I'm so excited for. Like, this year so far has been just incredible, and it is going to continue to be incredible. And I am manifesting shit, and it is amazing. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you with the episode. Again, connect with Luke. All the information is down in the show notes. Connect with me. Everything's in the show notes. Share with this episode with a friend. It really helps. If you're on Apple iTunes, leaving a review is super helpful. Spotify, you can literally just click that 5 stars. Super easy. And I always love to hear from you. I love to know what resonates with you, what you're taking from it, what you want to hear. So connect with me over on one of the channels, Instagram, TikTok. Send me an email. Email's also down below. Any of the ways. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will talk to you again soon.
Well, welcome to the Emotional Mastery Podcast. Today I have Luke Sneiwski, who is a wellness coach and somatic therapist. I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I will be completely honest, you're actually the first man to ever be on the podcast.
Wow.
So I'm really excited and a little bit nervous to have this conversation, but I think, not for any particular reason. I've done my own work, from past and stuff like that. And I've reached out to a few men to come on. And, I think what you do is really aligned as well, because I've said it for a while now. Like, last year for me was like the year of the body, really connecting
Mm.
deeply with my body. And I know there are men that listen to this podcast. So I think it's time to really have an offering for them that is, not that the other content isn't deep, but just more relatable from a man. So welcome.
Well, fantastic. What an honor. I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
what a cool little badge I can proudly wear
Yeah.
now. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Rochelle.
you're welcome.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, where shall we start? Where shall we begin?
Yeah, so I'll give you the floor just to introduce yourself, kind of, share anything about your story that you want to, just pivotal moments along the way that have kind of gotten you to where you're at now, and we go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to sum it up, I'm pretty much obsessed, or you can call it an obsession, just a student. Look, we'll call it an obsessed student of the human body. I've just been digging into my somatic experience for about the last 25 years, and it started with superficial sort of explorations, and it's been progressively deeper with each layer and each sort of new understanding that has emerged from my life. So it started as football. So I learned about the resilience of the human body because I was this skinny 15-year-old, never played a sport in his life. And through the steady application of exercise and nutrition, all the things that your coaches really push you through, I was able to take this thin, unathletic body and turn it into a professional athlete. So I was fortunate enough that I did play professional football in Italy as a quarterback, and but I accumulated all these injuries, and what I never learned was actually how that transformation happened. So even though I was getting this experience from my coaches, I don't know actually what had caused that. As a result, that's why I think I got the injuries. When I sort of retired from football after my lone season in Italy, I decided to pursue accounting. And here I am sitting behind the desk and finding that I'm getting even more injured sitting at a desk than I was playing football. So that was the wake up call to say, okay, I shouldn't be hurt. My lower back shouldn't be hurting sitting. My wrist, my neck, my elbow, all these little niggling pains. I'm like, it made no sense coming from professional football. So I decided to transition careers. And then my journey into the human body started with personal training. I quickly learned that exercise doesn't solve all problems and cure all ills. And so it piqued my curiosity. So I started getting different certifications, learning different modalities, going to nutrition school, massage school, neuromuscular therapy. And every time I learned something new about about the body, there was more to learn. So it was this never-ending rabbit hole of information and awareness. One of the first lessons I had was all the strength and power training and all the things that I'd done to become a successful professional athlete. Um, because I hadn't balanced that with the flexibility, the tissue care, and those aspects of holistic well-being is why I was carrying those injuries that I thought would never go away. So when I started implementing yoga, stretching, meditation, massage work, I started feeling great. I'm like, wow, I didn't know my body could feel this good. I eventually opened up a wellness studio in Santa Monica, and again, it was like a personal little laboratory where I could implement all the different modalities that I'd accumulated. The problem was that my clients were spending, 2 to 3 hours a week with me. So that means the other 160 something hours a week, they were on their own. So because I was shouldering the responsibility of their goals on my shoulders rather than them, I burned out quick because I thought I could solve all of their problems, all of my problems with a perfectly designed workout, with a perfectly designed nutrition plan, whatever it may be, but it was always falling well short. I quit, I closed down the gym and started traveling around the world making documentaries about healthy living in different cultures because I wanted to understand, well, what is at the foundation of health and wellness? What is at the very foundation of healthy living? And that's when I was really unpacking and exploring the 6 healthy lifestyle principles. We'll call that the 6 fundamental things that people need to be healthy: real food, movement, rest and relaxation, lifelong learning, community, and love. And the way that people implement those principles are numerous, diverse, and completely unique for each person. That's why they're principles. Um, but it was during that world trip, a trip that was sort of my exit strategy away from one-on-one work because I was burned out. But it was during that trip that I stumbled upon meditation. I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with the Vipassana, these 10-day silent meditation retreats. And on that third day, is when sort of my increasingly deeper understanding of the body dropped to an even deeper level, when I had a profound sort of meditation experience and a light bulb came on, and I knew immediately that this was going to be a practice that I carried with me for the rest of my life personally, and something that I was going to integrate into my professional and academic career as well. In fact, it inspired my PhD work, my PhD in psychology. I worked with pornography addicts using meditation as an intervention for men with pornography addiction. And it really allowed me to see that I could access something within myself that was previously inaccessible. I didn't know what an emotion was until I turned 30 years old. And if it wasn't for a practice like meditation, the practice of stillness, I wouldn't have been able to become aware of these sensations, these experiences in the body that were actually driving, that were at the root of some of my own problematic behaviors. So everyone calls PhD research PhD me search for a reason. We all go down that path because there's something that we're curious about within ourselves. And of course, I had to journey through my own experience of porn addiction or problematic pornography use, and I was able to use, combine two of my passions in terms of this behavior that I moved away from and the modality that I used to move away from it, and I was able to um, test that with other men. So it was quite, let's see, what's the word I'm like, fulfilling, and it was awesome that PhD research or my doctorate research was actually helping others.
Mhm.
And it was also one of the things maybe this might be a good time to pause or I can continue, but one of the things that I learned through the meditation practice was that no matter how much I meditated, right? So here's this individualistic, very masculine approach to personal sort of growth and maturity is that if I do the work alone on by myself, I'll have the results and I don't have to involve anyone else. And it's a very isolating way of approaching personal growth. And one of the things that I learned was that no matter how much I meditated, the relational dynamics and challenges in my everyday life weren't actually shifting. So it wasn't until I brought that somatic awareness, that connection to myself and my emotions and my body into relationship with others, that I was able to actually see that, at every single moment, if we're staying in connection with our body, we can navigate and consciously respond to our present moment experience rather than being dictated by the conditioned reactions that have been put into our body, through trauma, through conditioning, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different words. But in order to break free from that reprogrammed reaction within the body, we require that connection to connection to ourselves. So yeah, so my journey has really gone from those superficial beginnings of really athletic performance, and it's gone progressively deeper until reaching a sort of personal awakening to realizing that I can be the conscious creator of my life if I stay connected to the body.
Mhm. Why do you think athletes, like you said, until you like started yoga practice and realized there was this other aspect of like moving your body, like why do you think it's not just part of the athletic industry, I guess, or I don't know if it is now. I don't really watch sports that much, but I've always just been fascinated with athletes. And it's like if you eat right, like you said, the six principles, right? If you're incorporating that, your body could just do so much.
Yeah, I think it might be moving into a more holistic realm, but you have to understand that there's cultural norms at play. What traditional masculinity means,
Mhm.
and now then, and if hindsight is always 2020. I look back now, I'm like, of course I wasn't geared towards being that because there was a cultural norm within the realm of professional and collegiate athletics that I just simply did not align or resonate with, and I didn't even know that um, I didn't know how uncomfortably misaligned I was until I really discovered myself later on, in terms of discovering the emotions and being able to articulate what's actually happening on the inside. Now I know I found my place doing therapy and working with compassionate inquiry, whereas I can still enjoy watching a football game, don't get me wrong, but I can see that that's definitely not the mentality I have because I have a different understanding of what the body needs to thrive and how I want to treat my body and how I want to relate to it on a moment to moment basis. And there are certainly athletes who wake up, maybe wake up is the wrong term, but become increasingly aware of how they're treating their body and the way they're relating to their body. And there are some athletes who do make the decision to say, you know what, when I listen to my body's telling me change is required and I can't keep going down this track.
Mhm. Yeah. You had talked about the like masculine and isolating aspect of like meditation and healing and things like
Mm.
that. Do you think, because I know I went through that very much so in the beginning, and it really was until I got in tune with my body to understand like I needed rest. I needed to not just like be so structured in the way I was doing things. Do you feel like that's like a part of the process, or do you find that like when people come to you and you work with them, you can like bypass that step for them and they can just kind of like more move into it?
Well, it's a really good question. Because I'm aware of it is one thing, but I would say, hold on, I'm being distracted a little bit by something in the background. Can you repeat the question? Because I've lost my train of thought.
Okay, yeah. So the question was, do you feel like, because I know in my personal experience, I went through the whole isolation aspect of the meditation and the healing and the journaling and all those things. Do you think that's just part of the process, or do you think people can bypass that and go into like true healing where they're actually seeing results and they're external rather than just like in the mind in the beginning?
Well, I think there's beauty to both paths. First, that both you and I have experienced the former and know about the latter. I would say that it's not for us to decide how the client or the person in front of us will be able to navigate that path. You can model it, you can be aware of it, and they may or may not get to that point or beyond that point. But because we've had experience of the isolating aspects of it, we know that there's an inherent limitation there, that we can at least be present for the client when they arrive at that bottleneck or that resistance. So we can support the practice because there's a huge utility and usefulness to the individual practice, as you know that I know. It's incredibly beneficial to go inward and discover the self and ourself and all the sensations and emotions that make up our experience. But then it's just as important to be able to see that that is only as useful as being able to take that outward into relationship with the world, whether it's relationship with our clients, whether it's relationship with a work project, or relationship with other people, family members, partners, children, etc.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think like, I know for me, like that journey to just like finding that space within myself, and I think there's beauty in all of it. Like you said, going through that isolation and really being able to come to myself that way was also beautiful. But then, and I know again, everyone has their own ways. I'm just, yeah, just curious because I feel like I've seen it that be very much sort of the process of things, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's part of the pain of discovery is part of the experience. I've met very few people that have been able to bypass all of these little steps and been able to just
Mm-hmm.
jump. And I actually have a couple of friends, and I always laugh. I'm almost jealous. I'm like, how the hell did you get to where you are without the pain and the trauma that I had to pass through in order to do this?
Yeah.
It's sort of like, but at the same time, I'm not here to judge anyone's journey, and
Yeah.
it's everyone's on their own journey, and we have to follow that path ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I'd be curious, what was their response?
When I say that to them,
Yeah.
oh, they just laugh, and they're almost surprised that I see that within them. But
Mhm.
it's almost an acknowledgement that that person probably doesn't receive very often. In fact, I know they don't receive it often.
Mhm.
So it almost makes them almost somewhat proud to hear and being recognized that way.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of two people that come to mind who do have that, who have had that response actually.
Yeah. Can you explain what compassionate inquiry is?
So compassionate inquiry is a psychotherapeutic approach developed by Gabor Mate. I'm sure you and many of your listeners know who he is. It was co-created by both he and Satoram Kar. So he was the sort of genius behind the approach, and he was being witnessed and watched by a lot of people, and they just didn't know how he was able to meet and help people in the way that he was helping until Sataram was able to watch and just dissect everything he was doing. Then, and over the course of weeks and months and years, she created the sort of the teachable version of what he was doing. And when Compassionate Inquiry launched in 2017 or 2018, I was one of the first groups, and it fit perfectly because all of a sudden this what I considered to be a curse of sense of hypersensitivity and a curse of hyperemotionality, and a curse of sort of being hyper attuned and attentive to all the details of the people that I was speaking to. Like I could read people, but it was almost like a paranoia and hysteria almost. But to have compassion inquiry hone that skill and turn it into a gift where I was able to have the language to both navigate that experience within myself and be able to help others navigate their own experience so they have a greater understanding of themselves. It was transformational, and it was the modality that sort of bridge the understanding between these somatic practices that I had accumulated. So, yin yoga, meditation, breath work, cold exposure, movement, exercise, all of these physical practices that I knew had profound implications for emotional and mental aspects of a person's well being. I didn't have the language to help explain that. So, 25 years later, 20 years later, I'm still guiding people through movement and different modalities like yoga and breathwork, but the language that I use to explain it and the language that I use to ingrain it into their the reason why they're doing it is far different. I'm no longer talking about weight loss, six packs, or performance. It's about, well, how does, let's use breathwork for example. Breathwork allows us to get the type of breathwork that I teach. It allows us to get comfortable as our body's nervous system gets physiologically triggered, and being able to observe our body go into a stressed state and come out of it while we stay calm is a very important skill to cultivate if we're trying to seek change in everyday life, where we're going to get triggered no matter what. So why not consciously practice facing, welcoming, and being open to our body experiencing discomfort and coming out of the other side to see that there is another side.
Mhm. So, can you give like a small example of what like that would look like? So, like compassionate inquiry is what it sounds
Yes.
like, right? I mean, so
Okay.
is there any, yeah.
Okay, so let me dive in deeper to compassionate inquiry. So
Mhm.
let's say someone comes to me and has a challenge or a conflict or a problem to solve, which is everyone that comes to me because that's what we do. We help people change. So if someone says and they're dealing with a challenge of, well, I'm suffering at this moment because I got fired from my job. Okay, so compassionate inquiry doesn't deal with the surface level problem. It goes beneath the surface of the story to get to the beliefs and the emotions and the sensations that are at the core of that problem. So if someone says, "Well, I'm again, I just got fired and I'm really angry at my boss." Okay, so we've got two paths. We can continue focusing on losing the job and trying to find a new job and all the strategies that we can do there, but that's not really getting to the root, the heart and root of the matter. Instead, what we might focus on is, well, what is the interpretation what do you make it mean that you've been fired? And as soon as we start talking about the interpretation, this is the sort of the exit off the highway of the storytelling, and we start getting to the deeper meanings. And what an individual might say, or what someone might say, is that, well, getting fired makes me feel like a failure. Okay, wow. Well, that's a bigger issue than being fired, is considering or believing oneself to be a failure. So the next question might be, and again, this might be different because if a person gets fired, every single person will interpret that objective situation differently. Another person might say, well, it makes me believe I'm good enough. I'm not good enough. Another person might say, I make it mean that, again, the world is being unjust towards me. Again, it's unfair towards me. And then compassion inquiry takes that interpretation or takes the meaning beneath the story, and it starts to create a link between how familiar and how far back this experience might go. Because as soon as we make the connection between a past childhood experience and what's happening us to the present day, we're able to separate the old emotional wound from the present day challenge. So let's say the interpretation is, I'm not good enough. I got fired, so I make that mean that I'm not good enough. Well, then it's an exploration of how familiar is that belief? How far back does it go? What was happening in the early life of this person that would allow the belief of not good enough to arise? What was the context? When we fully explore that and help the client to see the origin of this core belief, they're able to then more easily address the unmet needs that were not present for that child. Because if the child received what they needed to receive in the environment that was forming the belief of not being good enough, then it wouldn't be so prevalent and activated in the present moment. They wouldn't be so um, impacted by an objective situation like losing one's job. Is that starting to
Mhm.
connect the dots for you?
Yeah. And yeah, I studied integrated attachment theory. And one of the like core themes of that is finding core wounds through exactly kind of like
Yes.
as you're describing and using this questioning of what does that mean about you and what do you need? And
Mhm.
so like as you're explaining it, I'm like that's triggering a lot of what I learned from just different terminologies. But yeah, I think it's really helpful for like self-awareness and then being able to go in and sort of like rewriting that, right? When you can do the breath work and the meditations and sort
Yes.
of like come back and then be able to like steer your beliefs to a different direction.
Right. I think the somatic practices really prove their utility when we start making the connection between how do we know when the old beliefs from our childhood are present today and now? Because we have to be able to identify within our present moment experience when the old belief is present. Like, how do I know that the belief of I'm not good enough is present. For someone, it might be, oh, I know that belief is present when I've got those judgmental thoughts of myself, or I feel this tension and shrinking in my chest and my stomach. So here are these two barometers. And all of a sudden, we're living our life and we become attuned and attentive to, oh, there's my body having that response. There it is. The old belief is coming up. When we see and when we become aware of the old belief present in the present day moment, then we can consciously choose to respond and then choose a different belief. I think that's really important for people to understand that if we want to change the belief, the only moment that we can create change is when the old belief is present. If we
Mhm.
think about change, if we plan change, it's one thing. If we have our individual practices, okay, that's going to support that process. But here comes a moment in everyday life where all of a sudden we're confronted. Oh, here it is, the moment of choice. Do I continue going down this path of believing that I'm not good enough and reacting in the same old way? Or do I face the discomfort that I've practiced facing and choose a different path, whatever that path might be?
Mhm. And how do you guide people to do that in the moment, right? Because I think when triggers and trauma come up, it's really hard to respond in a different way because our body just goes into that fight or flight.
Yes, because within a session, within any compassionate inquiry session, we're in relationship with two things. We're not just in relationship with the client's words as they're speaking, but this is the primary difference between compassionate inquiry and other forms of talk therapy. We're in relationship with the mind, but we're also in relationship with the body. It's almost as if we have to be hyper attuned and attentive to what the client's body is telling us at all times. So we're not just listening for the words, we're listening for the interpretations, we're watching the body to see if the breath changes, if the eyes change, if the posture changes, if the skin color changes. All of these things matter because if we can bring our client's attention to a present state within the body, then we can navigate it. And based on how we explore the childhood experience, we can then address those needs in the moment. So we're doing it in real time. So we're not just talking, it's this beautiful moment of alchemy because then we're integrating the present day challenge, the past childhood trauma, and now all of a sudden it meets in the present moment. And we have this beautiful moment where the client might be very connected to the emotions and the sensations in their body that are having a reaction. And then we can guide the client. And in fact, I'll change the words. We will help the client guide themselves, and we facilitate the process of the client guiding themselves through that experience in a different way.
Mhm. And when they're like to get them into their body, the whole somatic experience of that, is it strictly, I mean, like through emotions, or are you meditating with them in the moment, doing breath work in the moment?
That's a really good that's so the intention of compassionate inquiry is to meet the client in their present moment experience. And this is very important. So in other words, the client has to guide the process. Strictly speaking, leading a meditation or leading a breathwork practice wouldn't be an inherent part of compassionate inquiry because when we introduce meditation and breathwork, in other words, if I tell a client, let's breathe into that. Let's say I use that word. Oh, there's emotion present. Let's breathe into that. As soon as I invite the client or tell the client, in other words, to breathe into it, I will change their physiological state. And I'm not in on what we're trying to do is meet their experience. So instead of saying, let's breathe into that, I might offer, are you okay that that emotion is here? Because then it's leaving it in their corner and they get to decide. And I haven't done anything to invite a change to their experience. If they say no, then I might say, how would you like to respond? If they say, I don't want to feel this anymore, it's too much, I want to get out of it, then I might offer, would you like some help? Would you like some guidance with an exercise that might help you do that? But the first primary step is to first meet them where they're at before I invite a modality that might then change them. Because even the simple prompt of let's breathe into that is already shifting and changing. And the reason those subtleties are so important is because they dictate our level of comfort with the experience. If I say, well, let's breathe into that, I might be sending the subconscious message that there's something wrong with the pain they're feeling, when in fact, what they're feeling may be exactly what they need to grow and thrive. And I think you can appreciate that. I've listened to a few of your podcasts and you've talked about getting to the other side of pain. If a client is starting to come into contact with pain and they're only a few moments from reaching the peak and then the eventual passing away of that pain, I want to make sure that I'm with them for as long as they can manage and handle that pain safely before I invite some kind of detour off that or some soothing off that. So if, and this is again maybe another little side note for us wounded healers out there who have done our own journey, this is the greatest asset we bring into the process of change for clients. Because we've processed and sat with a lot of our own pain, we know what the client is capable of sitting with. We know their true potential, and we also know that there's another side to this. So we don't experience confusion or distress or fear when the client is in pain. In fact, we're a rock for them. So we can be this stable, objective rock. And imagine the reaction and how safe a client will feel when we simply say, "Are you okay that the pain is here?" Because then we're sending the message that, well, maybe there's nothing wrong with this pain and I can stay with it, rather than conditioning or prompting a reaction to move away from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like a beautiful process. When I first started my healing journey, I guess I was just did traditional therapy, and which I think is beautiful in its own way. But I remember like doing EMDR, and it was very much like every single time, you do either they had like the light, or I would do like the tapping. And just like every time the therapist would be like, "What's coming up?" or "How are you feeling?" And I remember like actually having resistance to that, because I was so much in my, like, I guess my trauma at that time, where it's like I had no self-worth. I had no like confidence myself. So it was like that question, I was like, I don't know, like what should I be feeling?
Yeah.
So do you ever
Yeah.
find any sort of resistance to it being client led in that way?
Absolutely. And this is why compassionate inquiry is an approach, not a specific modality. So every single person will have a different understanding and experience level with this world. So the way I describe it to the students, because I'm one of the CI mentors and facilitators, and so it's one thing to teach a student who's read all of Gabler's books, who's been through the year-long training, and when they sit as a client, they can allow themselves to be easily guided. It's quite another thing to be sitting across from someone who has zero experience with this world. So in those situations, we have to meet the client where they're at and trust their process. And we don't do this by trying to force change or do anything. We just get curious. So one common question I might ask is, well, why do you think it's important to, or what is your understanding of why it's important to feel our emotions, right? So I get the client to share with me their understanding before I offer anything. Because when I hear their understanding, I'll know, oh, okay, so this is where they're at. This is what their present understanding is, and I might be able to fill in some blanks. But what I might firstly do is validate where they're at, and that's really important to not make them feel that they're not doing this thing right. So I want to make sure that I understand their starting point, I understand the language they're using to describe these processes, and then I'm adapting to use the same language and same vocabulary. So when I talk about connecting to the body, I'm using a very different elevator pitch, right? A very different elevator pitch for someone like you versus a CEO versus a stay-at-home mom versus an athlete versus a teenager versus anyone, a seasoned psychotherapist.
hmm And, you talk about like that meditation and stillness. Is that, you know, like meeting clients where they're at? Like I understand
Mhm.
that aspect of it, but is that still something you encourage, like regardless of where they're at in their journey?
Absolutely.
hmm
And I do think that, I think that while CI is an approach and it's intended to be completely client-led, once that approach is applied to all of us individually who are therapists, coaches, and agents of change around the world, all of us come into that space with different expertise, different experience, and different tools in the toolkit. One of the tools in my toolkit that I will always lean on is the practice of stillness. And I use stillness intentionally rather than meditation, because stillness is the capacity to be able to observe without reacting. And I think that that quality is inherently important regardless of what the intention for change looks like on the surface. So no matter what direction, whether a person wants to make the relationship with their partner or their child better, whether a person wants to stop drinking, smoking, or watching porn, whether a person wants to be an entrepreneur, that quality of stillness, that quality of being able to face discomfort without reaction and choose a conscious way forward is absolutely essential. So yes, do I lean on stillness as a universal practice? Yeah, but that's because I'm Luke. This is who I am as a therapist. When people come
hmm
to me, this is who I am. So far, it's when people hear it's really about convincing the mind enough to sit with the discomfort of stillness, right? So a lot of people they don't want to meditate, and we'll call it meditation for sake of conversation. People don't want to meditate because they think they're bad at it, that they're doing it wrong. Oh, my mind's wandering. As soon as I close my mind, as soon as I close my eyes, all I do is think. I'm like, well, then you're doing it right. Because when you close your eyes, you become aware of the state of your mind as it always is. So it's not that your mind starts wandering when you close your eyes. This is how the mind is always reacting. So meditation is just a way of noticing that and then training that automatic response, or training or deconditioning, rather, deconditioning that automatic reaction to wander off. Again, which I think is a highly useful skill to have regardless of context.
Mhm. And so then that stillness without reaction versus the meditation, what is the distinguishing like factor
I
there
would,
for you? And
okay, so let's say, I mean, meditation for me, um, meditation for me comes with might be laced with some people with dogmatic foundational points, might be infused with expectations of what meditation means, whether, oh, meditation sounds like it's supposed to be relaxing. There might be some guidance, there might be some imagery involved. For me, stillness is this quality within meditation. So stillness can be described with three components. The first aspect of stillness is physical stillness. So when we meditate, sometimes we might scratch an itch on our face or adjust away from any sort of little niggle in our neck, or if there's any pain, we just move away from it instantly and instinctively. Where physical stillness invites us to observe that internal experience without reacting. So we say, okay, well, I'm going to practice noticing that discomfort and not doing anything about it. The second aspect of stillness is mental stillness, and you might call this focus. And I also want to say that mental stillness is not necessarily possible. So we'll say the intention for mental stillness. And the reason why I like to use the breath, natural breath, as our focal point for mental stillness is because as soon as we focus on our breath, we do two things. Firstly, we're focusing on the present moment because we can't breathe in the future, we can't breathe in the past, we can only breathe in the present. And the second thing that happens when we bring our attention to our breath is we're automatically bringing our attention to that which is doing the breathing, which is the body. And being connected to the body is very important to be able to tap into or feel those impulsive little cues or sensations that make us want to react. And here comes the third quality of stillness, which is to me the one quality that only the practitioner will ever know if they're doing it properly. So I can't assess it as an external observer. I can see if people are moving around, if they're being physically still or not. I might be able to tell if they're mentally still, again, by their physical stillness. But what I will never know is if they have an internal posture of stillness. And what I mean by this is there's two ways to be still. You can be tense and rigid and try to forcefully stay solid and still, or you can soften completely and relax into the experience. And I say that because when we stay in stillness for longer periods of time, we may begin to notice that it becomes increasingly uncomfortable. The aches and the pains might grow a little bit more and a little bit more. And there's two ways of relating to that experience. We can either fight against the tension with more tension, which causes more pain, or we can soften into the experience. And when we relax and soften into the experience and accept it, that is the greatest gift you can give your mind and body because you actually teach your mind what acceptance feels like. The words acceptance, surrender, all these words are just concepts. We like to think that, oh, yeah, I want to be more acceptance. I'm practicing acceptance. But your body is going to tell the truth whether you're accepting or not. So if we have the experience within stillness practice of acceptance, it's our experiential reference point for everyday life for whether or not we're actually accepting something or not. So then when we're in conversation with someone, we're having a challenging moment, and we might talk like, you can ask yourself, am I accepting this? And then you can tune into your body and notice, well, if you're holding tension, resistance, and there's agitation, you're not actually accepting it. And that's a really good starting point for knowing whether or not we are in acceptance or resistance for something.
yeah, how do you like I lost my question. Sorry, my I heard the garage door open. No, but like for me, I know like meditation, I recommend it to everybody too. And my even like all the years I've been doing it, my mind still gets really busy sometimes. But it's like it is learned that practice of staying still through the itches, or you know what I mean, because it is like
Yeah.
distracting. But there does come that point, even for me, you know, that it's like where my foot goes numb or it starts tingling or it hurts, you know, and I'm just
Mhm.
like, and then it's like I try not to go down that, because it's like what you resist persists, or where your attention goes, energy
Mhm.
flows, right? And then it just gets bigger. And, you
Yeah.
know, sometimes I pull out of it and sometimes I just shift a little bit. But
Mhm.
it's like, you know, your second point about like being in the body and the breath and the awareness that comes there. And I think that's why so many people are so resistant to it, right? Because it is like coming to that space where you are paying attention to your body. You are alone with your thoughts. Like
Mhm.
so many people have said to me, like, I just can't meditate, you know? And it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
my thoughts are too busy. And I think it really comes down to that fear of just like being with yourself and nothing
Mhm.
else, and having to
Mhm.
face like everything that you've been avoiding in your like waking
Uh,
hours.
I couldn't have said it better. That last line, you took the words out of my mouth and what I wanted to speak to. You face what you've been avoiding, and that's the confronting bit. And yet, with stillness, that's what it requires us to do. And I can also appreciate what you shared around your foot falling asleep or going numb after long periods of meditation. I remember in the first 10-day sits where you're sitting for sitting for 10 days, 11 hours a day, not speaking to anyone for 10 days. And there were moments during those long sits where I was convinced that they were going to have to amputate my leg because there's no way my leg was going to survive this pain. And every time those long sits would end, I would open up my eyes and I would expect a bone to be protruding from my leg because the pain was so big. But as soon as I opened my eyes and I looked at where I thought the pain was going to be, it was gone, it dissolved. So again, stillness for me, not just this connection for the body, there's so many benefits to it, right? Well, we can talk about that if you'd like, but the biggest one for me was, do I have to believe the stories of my mind? Do I have to trust everything that my mind is telling me? And it's within this complete, like, isolated vacuum of stillness that you can really isolate those thoughts and say, is that really true? Something so obviously pain, something so obviously injurious, to open my eyes, not only the pain be gone, but also to have this experience of increased mobility and openness and tension-free body. I'm like, well, maybe I don't have to trust those fear-based, anxiety-provoking thoughts all the time. And there's a truth that I can look to, and the truth is found within the experience of my body. Is my body actually accepting this? Is my body healing? What evidence do I have within the framework of my body to either go against or to confirm what might be a thought in my mind?
Mhm. So when you're doing this, like you're literally sitting still in the same position for hours and hours and hours.
No,
Like,
so that's
okay.
so let's make it let's the long the maybe I know people that do 4 to 8 hour sits, and there's probably that do many hours more. For me, a long sit is an hour.
Mhm.
Maybe, no, a normal sit is an hour. A long sit is like an hour and a half or 2 hours. But that didn't happen until I did a few of these 10 days. And even on the 10-day silent meditations, the longest you're really ever required to sit in a or you're never required, but the longest they invite you to sit still is an hour. And then after an hour, you go take a quick bio break and you come back and you do the next hour. And then you go take a bio break and you come back doing the next hour. But that hour is tough. An hour is
Mhm.
challenging. And for many people, 5 minutes is challenging, right? So
Yeah.
to ask someone to sit for an hour is quite a big ask. And I would say it's unnecessary at first. At the beginning, if someone wants to dive into the deep end, then yes, there's no better environment for that kind of self-exploration than an environment where you're not allowed to speak to anyone. It's just you and your thoughts. You have no food to cook. Everything's made for you. Everything's made for you. You have nothing to do. They take away your cell phone. They take away your books. No exercise, nothing. It's just you in the practice of self-observation. So the reason I sort of um, I recommend is not the wrong is the wrong word. I would say I would invite people to be curious about it is because I was meditating for years before that 10-day experience. And I never really understood what meditation was doing and why it was doing and how it was impacting my body. And then when I stripped away everything else and had a very isolated experience, a very deep, immersive experience in meditation, then I'm like, oh, So that's what it's all about. And as painful as it was, of course, I've been back 7 times. So it was an experience that kept giving me more and more benefit, because each time you'd go, it's like you'd have this deep exploration of yourself. And I should note, and I will note, that these 10-day silent meditations are the first modality that I've ever experienced that created permanent change, not just like transient temporary, it was permanent change. And each time I went, it was like digging a slightly layer deeper and digging a little layer deeper. And my understandings of pain and myself and everything shifted with each time. And the beautiful, I think the most helpful or most motivating and inspiring aspect was that the difference between everyday life and these meditation retreats started getting less and less. And that's when I knew that, okay, that what I was experiencing and who I was and how I was relating to life became was they were bridging the two. And that, I think I took that to be quote unquote progress, that it wasn't such a contrasting experience to go from everyday life to this meditation course. All of a sudden the meditation course felt like just another experience, and I'd go back to everyday life, and then, yeah, it would be a little more chaotic, obviously, but I'm like, okay, I'm still okay. And that was for me like a really encouraging sign that this stuff is working.
Mm-hmm. And was it like, I'm going to go back to the pain for a moment just because I find it fascinating. Because I feel like for me, that's always like pushing my limit. I like know exactly the point where, and that's a mental block that I have to get past, right? But it's usually that 25-30 minute where my foot is just like out, it is done. And then I'm like, it's like you're meditating on the pain, right? And so to,
Yes.
like to hear that, and it's like for an hour and then a break and then an hour, it's like, how did that like transform your relationship with just like pain in general?
I remember the first time that not even third day of my first 10-day retreat. And the teacher kept saying that it's not pain, it's just sensation, right? So I kept trying to repeat to that mantra to my in my mind while I'm sitting with this pain. And like, it's not pain, it's just sensation, but I wasn't convincing anybody. The pain was so pronounced in my body as I was attempting to sit with it longer and longer. And obviously it gets more intense as you go, and you're trying to cushion yourself. You're putting cushions underneath your knees, you're putting cushions underneath your bum. You're just really trying to shield yourself from this pain. But the more you focus on trying to avoid the pain, the more the pain is coming for you, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the moment where I was there, and I'm like, and I just realized that I wasn't actually accepting the pain. And so for these 3 days of constant experimentation, internal experimentation that no one else can do except you, it was, am I accepting the pain? No, I'm not. Am I accepting the pain? No, I'm not. And there came a moment, it was like I just said to myself, you know what? This is it. This is what my experience is right now. And it was uh, an authentic acceptance. And in that moment, it was from intense pain to euphoric bliss with the snap of a finger. It went from pain, and the moment I actually accepted it, my knees dropped, my spine straightened, and I just felt a rush of vibrations through my body, and it was euphoria and bliss. And I was just witnessing this experience, and that was literally the first experience, that first, I would call it, consciousness altering experience that I have had with meditation. I'm just like, wow, what happened? How do you explain the transition from the most immense pain I've ever experienced to euphoria through my body? That it was just, it changed my understanding of pain. It got me so curious around my stories of pain, what I believed pain to be. It made me study pain. It made me embrace conscious discomfort practices wholeheartedly, things like cold exposure and sauna, and really, really understanding what my relationship with pain was. It took me 3 10-day sits to realize that I was also sitting with pain because of an old core belief that I deserved the pain. So imagine that wake up call where you sit with pain because you believe you deserve the pain, as if the pain is a sin for past transgressions. That was a big one for me to work through, because when we begin to explore our own relationship with pain, why is really important. Why are you sitting with this pain? Is it because you believe you deserve it? So there needs to be, you need to explore this resonance, because there's a difference between self-flagellation and compassionate conscious discomfort. And the difference between the two is our why, because it could look the same on the outside. Here's two people doing an ice bath. One is doing it as a subtle form of self-flagellation because they believe that they're not good enough in this present moment, that they somehow need to improve themselves to get to an acceptable state. Or is it compassionate conscious discomfort, which is an understanding that exposing our body to the process of hormesis, which is a small stress on the body that increases its resilience and improves longevity and improves many physiological aspects of health, and that we're gifting our body with the practice of cold exposure, and we use it as a laboratory to get curious about how we're relating to the emotions that come up for us as we're in the ice bath, right? So when you're in an ice bath, it's a confrontation with angst and fear. And it's a playground, really. It's like, wow, here it comes. How am I relating to it? Am I fighting it? Am I resisting it? What's happening in my mind as I'm experiencing this fear? Can I stay with it? Can I relax and surrender into the cold? Can I listen to my body and know when it's time to get out rather than my mind guiding the process and saying, no, I need to stay until I'm at 5 minutes? Or can I listen to my body and say, okay, my body is fine. Let's see what happens if I stay with my body. Oh, there's that shiver. Oh, there's another shiver response. Maybe my body's telling me that it's time to get out before the shiver response gets too intense. So again, it can be a beautiful laboratory of exploring our present moment experience, or it can be a subtle form of self-punishment and self-flagellation. Can you see the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's really powerful. And it kind of gave me an aha moment too, because I started doing like cold showers just as like an introduction to cold exposure. And I did it, I think, more so from that, like, I need to be doing this because this is like, and I would go in and I'd be like, one, two, like counting all the way till 30 and then like turning it back up. And I stopped doing it because it was just like my whole body was so tense. And I would try and go in and just be like, no, I like, this is going to be great, and it just like, but so that is really powerful to have that like differentiation and being like, no, this is not like something I have to do to be like spiritually XYZ or anything like that, just to come with a curiosity. And I think, something you said earlier too in the meditation of just like feeling that like that bliss and that from going from that pain to that. And, I think a lot of us have read stories where, on rare occasions people can, go through like surgery without anesthesia or something like that, just with the power of meditation. And it seems
Mm,
sometimes like so far removed from what we're actually capable of, which is not
mm,
true.
mm.
But it's yeah, it's really fascinating. Like I haven't gotten to that point yet. And in 2023 for me was like I said I wanted to just do things that made me uncomfortable. So whether it's cold showers or just in kind of pushing through that discomfort, because I just feel like I've gotten to that point in my journey. And I don't know if I could do 10 days just for being a single mom and finding help for the kids, but something like 3 to 5 days. I feel like I'm just trying to push my limits this year. So that sounds like really, I don't know. It sounds really fascinating, really interesting experience to have. And for you, like after you did that, after you experienced that bliss from going from pain to that, did you ever again experience that pain in meditation? Was that like a one off or you kind of repeated it?
All the time. And
Okay.
that's the funny part. And you think, here's the thing. You think after that the pain is done, but
Yeah.
no, no, not
It's
at
like
all.
haha.
Here's Yeah, it's like fooled you because the
Yeah.
mind tricks itself. The mind tricks
Mm.
itself into thinking you've got it figured out. Here's the naive thought. The naive thought I had was here's me having this experience, right? It's an experience, nothing more. It doesn't mean anything unless you give it meaning. It's a unique physiological experience. Here it comes, and here comes my naive mind saying, "You are now enlightened, Luke." And I'm like, like no more pain. All of a sudden, the most immense pain comes up in the most innocuous spot, right? Because when you sit cross-legged, you expect your legs to hurt from falling asleep, your knees, your neck, your mid back definitely.
Mhm.
But all of a sudden, here comes this strange pain that's like right here on the left side of my upper arm, not near a joint, not near where it's supposed to hurt, but it feels like a metal rod is being pulled out of my arm. And I'm like, what is this? And here are these, and there's two ways. The way that I conceptualize and the way that I understand it now is that this is your body in a very deep state where it's allowed to process the oldest of oldest wounds. And those wounds are not pleasant to bring to the surface, and they're not pleasant to feel and experience. And the reason I rest sort of my hat on that theory is because every cell of our body, the trillions of cells in our body, since we were single celled organisms, have been programmed for one thing. survival and thriving. That means there's trillions of little cells that are working aimlessly towards one intention. How do I heal? How do I heal? How do I heal? When we sleep and our mind is out of the way, what does the body do? It heals, it recovers, it restores. Here comes another environment where we concentrate the mind, focus deeply in our body, and if we're completely and utterly still, all of a sudden the body finally has this time and space to process things that it's not able to process in everyday life or nor in sleep. So one way to conceptualize the things we feel when we're meditating is, oh, that's pain. Well, another way to conceptualize it is actually my body is just healing, and healing isn't a comfortable process. And the reason I sort of again put my head on the healing sort of uh, or I say it's healing, is at the end of these 10-day sits, when all popular media and all studies say if you sit for long hours of the day, you ruin your posture, you're going to get aches and pains, you're going to, all these things are going to happen to your body. In this particular environment, when you're meditating for these many hours a day, at the end of these 10 days, every single person, and I'm a PhD researcher, so every time I do these 10-day sits and there's like 100 people around me, I love to ask the questions. How does your spine feel? How does your body feel? All of them that complained about pain, I'd walk up to everyone, man, so much pain. I'm like, yeah, but what about your shoulders and your back now? And they're like, oh my God, I have so much more movement. I'm like, yeah, isn't that weird that you experienced all of that pain, but you have more mobility in your body than you've experienced in years? And that's what I noticed. I'd walk out of that and I would feel 2 inches taller. I would feel as if every shred of weight or tension that was in my body, it was like a towel that was wrung completely dry, and it's very painful and would be very tension inducing to wring that towel. But as soon as you let go of that towel and went back to its natural state, it would be free of all that tension. And that's the analogy I have. When you go to these 10-day sits, your body is going into this tension state so that it can release its own tension. So it's creating this discomfort so that it can process and access things that are not accessible in everyday life.
Mm. And do you have a process for yourself now, like with when you do feel some sort of like ache or pain or something in your body, like actually communicating with that, like and understanding what it means?
Oh, that's the best part. It's like no longer is my body the boy who cried wolf, right?
Mm.
Every sensation is now something to be explored with curiosity rather than something to be panicked about. I've witnessed my body move through changes that I had ankle surgery after playing football, and they told me I wasn't going to be able to walk properly when I was 40. Now I'm 1 year away from 40 years old, and I'm dancing and nearly, I'm salsa dancing, Latin dancing, doing everything I could dream of that I wasn't able to do before. I have more mobility in my ankle than I did before the surgery. And I'm like, why do we trust these opinions when we can go to the body and get more evidence as to what's happening? So yes, not only do I um, feel these sensations and feel negative or feel something, I get curious around the thoughts that I have around it. Then, because of luckily I've had years of experience with different movement modalities, I can explore and say what is causing it, what might be the remedy, and then I get to test it. And um, this is the difference between how I exercised when I was in my early 20s as a professional athlete as I exercise now. Whereas before, it's a rigid program dictated to me by coaches, dictated to me by a strength coach, and I'm just following it religiously. Now I wake up and I'm like, what does my body need today? What does my body feel like today? Yesterday I did this movement. Today my body feels like this might be better. If I wake up and I have sore muscles from a gym workout, I might do yoga. If I have extremely, if I have an aggressive or whatever you want to call it yoga session, I find that my hamstrings are a little sore. I'm going to go for a swim today if my shoulders are tight. Everything is dictated by my body, and it turns my movement strategies again from something that I'm supposed to do into a gift for my body. And I think it makes all the difference.
Hmm. Yeah. I have one final question for you. And then I know you also recently wrote a book. So I would love to just give you some space to tell everyone about that. But of course, it's the Emotional Mastery Podcast. So I would love to know. I know you said that you didn't really fully experience your emotions until you were 30. So I would
Yeah.
just be curious what that process was for you. Like, how did you feel or experience your emotions before that age? And then how did that shift? And what do you feel like was the thing that had that shift to be able to process and move through your emotions?
I was lucky enough to meet a counselor, Dr. Graham Mead, and he's been a teacher of mine. Now he's a good friend. Now he's a colleague, essentially. And he introduced me to the work of Michael Brown, the presence process. You might be familiar with the presence process. And it's the first sort of work the first time I'd been able to articulate, connect with emotions. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been able to move away from porn. For me, moving away from porn was the easiest, most effortless decision because I stopped focusing on it as the problem. Instead, every time I felt the impulse to watch or view porn, instead I got really curious about what was happening in my body, and I would ask myself, why am I sad? Why am I angry? What am I stressed about? What am I avoiding? I would ask myself these series of those four questions, and without fail, every single time there was an answer. Sometimes my body muscle spasm, sometimes there was tension, sometimes there was tears, sometimes there was shivers. There's always a message from my body. And as soon as I allowed my body to have that experience, there was no urge. So I never actually quit porn. I just focused on my body instead, and it just disappeared because the need for porn, which was essentially blunting and numbing my uncomfortable emotional states, was no longer necessary. I don't know. Does that answer your question, or is there a
Yeah.
little more?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I resonate in I had struggled with alcohol, I guess. And addiction is addiction, right? And it's like
Yes.
that's what I would do is like if I wanted to have a drink, I would have a glass of pour some tea and I would get curious about why it is that I want to drink or what's the numbing thing or what's coming up. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that's so helpful in like really having that self-awareness of what's happening in our body instead of just like pushing it down because I think like two men are just told like if you feel you're weak and all those labels and expectations, I guess.
Absolutely. And you've talked about a little bit earlier, and I'll mention it again now, just the power of expression. Once we're able to express and articulate what's happening for us within our body, that's a really powerful way of being able to determine whether we're in our mind or in our body. And maybe this is a good time to talk about my book. My book is called Somawise, Get Out of Your Head, Get Into Your Body, because I do believe that the pathway to a more deep and meaningful life is found when we are connected to our emotions, connected to our body. And one of the ways that we know if we're speaking from our body rather than our mind is the language that we use to describe our experiences. So if I ask when I'm doing compassionate inquiry with my clients and I say, well, how are you feeling? And they say, well, I feel overwhelmed or I feel manipulated. And those sound like they might be feelings, but guess what? Those are interpretations. So those are stories from the mind. So if we're really listening, we can decipher and really know if the person is connected to their body or their minds. Instead, I might ask the client, so when you're feeling overwhelmed or manipulated, what do you notice in your body? And then we might get an answer that's from the body. I feel a tension here, or I feel this pain here, or I feel the heaviness here. And then we might invite them to stay with that experience. And what happens when you stay with it? And then an emotion comes. But it's only when we stay with the body and stay with the experience that we're able to firstly begin to feel it and then be able to articulate it. And the articulation is the evidence that we are actually speaking from the body.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and so yeah, I guess Somawise is that exploration.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I learned is that we all talk about connecting to the body. We all talk about it's the latest trend and movement in somatic psychology and talking therapy. I would say that the intention of my book was to fill in the gap of how to actually do that, how to travel that same journey from superficial connection to very deep, profound connection, and how to actually foster and build that bridge between the mind back into the body, a place where we've been conditioned to be disconnected from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. I will leave the link for the book. And if there's any way or anywhere else anyone can find you, if you want to let them know, I'll have it linked in the show notes. But if you want to just let them know quickly now as well.
Perfect. Yeah, just my full name.com, lukesneiwski.com. And yeah, they can reach out there for any online programs, Somawise online program or compassionate inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you.